When I put it to a vote, Krakin Krakoa listeners overwhelmingly responded that a deep dive into the missing mutants of the Dawn of X was of most interest of any topic I was considering. We're well over a year into the Hickman era of X-Men and the Dawn of X, and while we've seen a whole lot of mutants, there are still some rather notable characters who have not appeared, and whose absence is notable and raises interesting questions. Up front, I'll note that small background cameos are common, and it's possible characters I'll discuss have literally been seen. Likewise, I'm avoiding mutants like Manifold or Molly Hayes when we know perfectly well that they're in other Marvel books, Black Panther and Runaways respectively. My focus is on characters who we've seen next to nothing of, who could have major roles in Hickman's X-Men moving forward. Today I'll answer, who are the most notable missing mutants in this era of X-Men? Who are the characters that we know and love from Marvel history and that we have not seen hardly anything of that could have major roles moving forward? Today I'll cover the first 6, I believe, in part 1 of the Missing Mutants of Krakoa. Hey everybody, you're listening to Krakin Krakoa number 104. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. If you like the Comic Book Herald YouTube channel or Krakin Krakoa, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing. It helps me out an awful lot in terms of new people finding this YouTube content that I'm putting out. Spoilers for some discussed comics in the Dawn of X may follow. Number 1 on the list, missing mutants are, of course, the Omega level mutants. Back in Marvel's incoming special, released at the end of 2019, we saw Mr. Sinister running through a list of Omega-level mutants, declaring that no one has Legion or Mr. M's DNA because no one knows where they are. The remainder of these, Sinister either had their DNA, or in the case of Franklin Richards, that was sort of a tease going into the X-Men Fantastic Four miniseries, that now Franklin Richards is on the island, presumably Sinister has acquired his DNA as well. But in the case of Legion and Mr. M, we haven't really seen them. In the ongoing Ten of Swords event, which is happening right now, we've been seeing a lot of teases that Mr. M, real name Absalom Mercator, may well be in Otherworld, okay? So every indication, and I'm recording this at a point where we haven't officially seen this yet, but every indication is that Mr. M may be playing a role in Otherworld, so I suspect we're likely to see him soon, so I won't go too deep on that character in particular. I will, though, talk about Legion, who we have not seen. Who is Legion, if you're not familiar, or if you haven't seen, for example, the FX show, which obviously isn't quite as X-Men heavy as you might expect, but still very much plays in the X-Men universe. Legion is the son of Professor Charles Xavier. This is something that they find out later into Legion's life, honestly. The Professor X doesn't even know about him until the mid-80s New Mutants issue, in which they finally connect. And Legion is an Omega-level mutant. He has tremendous psychic and these like reality warping abilities. He also has something that has been really canonicalized in the Cy Spurrier run of Legion. He's got all these different sort of characters in his head, right, that can take over at any given time, that have different power sets. He's immensely powerful, but he's also sometimes immensely fragile, at least as far as his mental state is concerned. The last we've seen of Legion actually came prior to the Age of X-Men event, which was the event that right before Hickman's X-Men really took over. And it was in the Uncanny X-Men Disassembled. It was the relaunch of Uncanny X-Men. I think started in late 2018 and into 2019. And Legion showed up looking super dapper, hair not up in that crazy giant flat top, but instead down, long flowing in a business suit. And we kind of see him come at odds with Nate Gray, and he's really sort of weeded out of the event from there. To my recollection, he does not play a particular role in the actual Age of X-Men proceedings itself, although every time he shows up, this is a character who often warps realities, or in many cases, like he is the impetus behind the likes of the Age of Apocalypse or the Age of X, which is a Mike Carey written event that a lot of people sleep on because that run gets a little bit overrated. But Legion is very much at the center of the Age of X. One of his personas sort of drives that event and that alternate reality. And one thing that Open Mike Eagle reminded everyone on Krakin Krakoa number 100, the live episode we did together, Legion resets the world at the end of the Age of X, but there aren't really checks and balances on, well, did he reset it exactly the way it was, or is everything that's happening in a Legion influenced universe, that opportunity for story is still very much out there, right? That's the type of impact that this character potentially has. So what's coming from Legion in the future? Well, we can more or less bank on a major Legion story coming down the pipeline in Hickman's X-Men. I mean, he's the son of Professor X, he's one of 14 Omega-level mutants, and he's actually the one responsible for the death of Destiny way back in, I think, the Muir Island saga, if not right before that. There have been moments in X-Men in the early 90s there where Legion is having these dreams like of connective tissue with Destiny. So he's got all these really interesting connections to these some of the bigger mysteries and ideas that are in the world of X-Men right now. Legion has to play a role. I mean, really the only question is like literally where is he? It does Professor X and Moira and Magneto, that kind of like Quiet Council triumvirate, do they know as well? Or is Legion a wild card for them? Because again, one thing I will point out especially is we know from Moira's journals that the birth of Proteus was something that her and Charles essentially like crafted, essentially built from scratch in order to produce a reality warping mutant, and the same with Legion. The same with Legion, potentially. So they sort of manufactured these two mutants in particular, and now they have them. What are their plans for them? I think that's an interesting question. Number 2 on the list, related in that we just talked about the Age of X-Man, but it is X-Man himself, Nate Gray. Who is Nate Gray? Well, he is the biological son of his dimensions, which is the Age of Apocalypse, Scott Summers and Jean Grey. He's actually genetically manufactured by Mr. Sinister to be created. So Nate Gray is not listed among the Omega-level mutants on Hickman's chart that came out in the House of X and Powers of 10 series, although his power set has certainly been comparable at times. As I mentioned, 2019's Age of X-Man event, which preceded the House of X and Powers of 10. It's a universe created by Nate in which he tries to create a mutant utopia, essentially. So that is his power set. I mean, but in short, he is the Age of Apocalypse version of Cable, who has made it now into the Earth 616. What's the last we saw of Nate? Well, as the Age of X-Man event ended, he kind of ultimately caves and gives in and says, all right, I'll reset things. The X-Men can go back the way things were. And, basically he says, hey, go enjoy the Hickman era of X-Men is more or less where we net out. But he does have a really interesting conversation with Magneto in the final issue of Age of X-Man, where he has this conversation with Magneto saying like, all right, I'm going to make a deal with you. You can go back, but a version of you, the Age of X-Man version of you, has to stay here with me. And then they start making plans, right? Using this, the life seed, I think, that they've been using to manufacture this reality. They say, all right, we're going to make a perfect world. And Nate asks a simple question, as he puts it: what would you sacrifice, essentially, for mutant utopia? So there's a lot of theories, and this is something I've talked about as well in like the 6-month time gap video I did here on Krakin Krakoa. And, obviously, like, this is something to dig into theory-wise. What are they sacrificing for their dreams? Is Nate sacrificing his own presence, his own ability to enjoy this utopia, to give the X-Men and the current House of X thing, to give them a chance, essentially. So I don't expect we'll see X-Men anytime soon. I think at most we could possibly get a reference to like him having a role in allowing this possibility for Moira's 10th life. But again, it's not a character I expect to see soon. Another big one, number 3 on the list, the Shadow King. All right, let's get into, first, before we talk about the weirdness of Shadow King's Krakoan presence, let's talk who is Shadow King. He is really the arch nemesis of Professor Charles Xavier. I mean, I know like Professor X and Magneto obviously are arch enemies historically in X-Men comics if you just go from like the earliest Lee Kirby days. But once you get into the Claremont era and you start getting that more nuanced Magneto, who obviously, at this point in time is very much on the side of Charles Xavier, Shadow King he has telepathic abilities. He is kind of an ancient evil according to some stories. And he is like Professor X's opposite, right? He uses his psychic abilities for power, for gain, for wealth, and for everything that Professor X is opposed to, and definitely not, human mutant relationships. Now, technically, we have seen Shadow King in the pages of the Empire X-Men #2 tie-in issue. Okay, it was literally one big old splash page in which a psychic army from Krakoa comes through to fend off this plant zombie army thing that was happening in the event, which is very fun. People should check it out if you haven't. But there is a visual of Shadow King. Now, a lot of people were saying like, well, it looks like he's walking on spider legs though, like on robot spider legs, and that makes me think more of Mojo than it does of Shadow King, which is fair. But actually, those are the same robot spider legs that Shadow King was walking on in the Astonishing X-Men run that preceded House of X. Okay, so in Astonishing X-Men, we have written by Charles Soule, we have a Shadow King who has essentially taken over Professor Xavier. So Professor X dies at the end of Avengers vs. X-Men. That's in 2012. The character gets brought back, and when he gets brought back essentially as a prisoner of the Shadow King. There's all this stuff in there about like them being trapped together for thousands and thousands of years. So they go through this huge battle in the pages of that Astonishing X-Men run, again, written by Charles Soule, and like literally at any point in the current House of X, it could be revealed that Shadow King is still a part of Professor X. Like, they had this battle, Professor X casts him out, he escapes the astral plane, he goes into Phantom X's body, calls himself the Man Called X. It's a whole thing that there's still a lot of questions about. Again, like, if you check out the 6 months later thing I did, the Krakin Krakoa I did, which I'll have to link here, I talk about all these weird historical events, but, like, Shadow King, as far as we know, I mean, yeah, he got cast out, but he's like, there's nothing that really says he's gone for good. I don't expect Hickman to fall back on using like, oh, this is Professor X taken over by the Shadow King. That's why some of the creepiness and some of the questions that, lie at the heart of Krakoa are there. I think that's too easy of an out. I think anything, honestly, that sort of allows Professor X and Moira and their plans to say like, oh, these are, yep, we actually were evil because we were possessed. I think that's way too easy of an out and not a great approach to this story arc. But it's definitely an opportunity because, Shadow King, like, he's out there. We don't totally know what he's doing. Again, technically speaking, just based on what's on the panel, that Empire X-Men #2 shot, Shadow King is on Krakoa based on that. But given that he does not show up in any of the fighting in the next 2 issues, like he's completely gone after that point, I do that ties into my theory there that Shadow King is actually just messing with us, and he's allowing himself to be seen only occasionally just to kind of drive us insane, and he's there but nobody knows he's there, which would be actually very fun. Number 4 on the Missing Mutants list, John Proudstar. Okay, let's talk Thunderbird a little bit. Who is John Proudstar? Well, he is one of the first X-Men on the team in the all-new, all-different X-Men era of 1975, when we had Len Wein and Dave Cockrum write Giant Size X-Men right before Chris Claremont takes over with Cockrum in the ongoing X-Men series. Now, in the issues 94 and 95, Claremont and Cockrum's first together, John Proudstar, aka Thunderbird, he dies. He actually dies in a plot to foil Count Nefaria, who is the villain the X-Men fight in those issues. So like right off the bat, he gets 2 issues. He is tough and proud, and in many ways very similar to Wolverine. In what Wolverine would become is sort of the tough guy of the X-Men. You can see character-wise potentially why they would have written out this character, although certainly in terms of representation, it is a net negative, I would say, in terms of killing off that character immediately. Nonetheless, the character has been more or less dead since that mission. I mean, we've seen resurrections here and there in terms of like some of those, these characters brought back from the dead in a Chaos War or whatever it is, but it's John Proudstar is generally gone. He is generally not a part of the X-Men. So the last we've seen of him, technically, some people have postulated that he is visible in the Green Lagoon shot in X-Force, that amazing spread drawn by Joshua Cassara. I don't think this is John Proudstar. There's a couple reasons for that, but first off is John Proudstar has a brother named James, James Proudstar, who has been in X-Men comics really ever since. Not ever since his death. There's a few years in between, but like he shows up pretty quickly in the pages of New Mutants. He's one of the original Hellions, I think. And James Proudstar has since been I think he goes by Warpath. He's on X-Force. He's been around the X universe. So my thinking there is that that's probably who this is, given that there's only one of them. Apparently making moves on, I think, Selene there, so go James. But I don't think that's going to be James Proudstar. And we saw in the Giant Size Nightcrawler one-shot, too, the Giant Size special there by Hickman and Alan Davis, that Nightcrawler sees a ghost of John Proudstar in that. Why would he be seeing a ghost of him and be weirded out by that if John Proudstar was resurrected and on the island of Krakoa? So what's coming for John Proudstar? Well, it could be a whole lot of things. And if you've listened to my Krakin Krakoa on Sinister Secrets, you know that I've got some theories here on what Proudstar's role might be, but there's a couple of connections I'll point out right away. Sinister has mutant DNA, he talks about in Powers of 10, and he says it's from Thunderbird. It's from John Proudstar. So there's already that connection. There's also the completely wild red shoes theory, which I pointed out I got from J.M. Miles Explain the X-Men, the podcast, where there's a coloring error in the issue of James Proudstar's death in X-Men number 94 and 95, where in one panel, for the most part, his shoes are always blue, and then like in a panel where he dies, his shoes are red. So there's the red shoes theory that is actually Mr. Sinister, and why, which again, like you kind of gotta watch the whole Sinister Secret to really get the feel and the flavor for this. But Sinister, his first Sinister Secret is about red shoes. Okay, so like it's not just total conjecture, even though it's a pretty wild hypothesis and theory. But I will say it's extremely weird if Proudstar is not resurrected already on Krakoa, just given the fact that his death was quite traumatic, that it was very memorable in terms of this all new, all different X-Men team coming together. He should definitely have been among the top, I think, mutants to get considered for resurrection. So if that hasn't happened yet, and it doesn't have anything to do with Sinister, and frankly, even if it did, like who is blocking that? Who is blocking his resurrection, and how are they doing that verbally? Because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Really, I would just like some confirmation that he is around and getting a shot the same way all other Krakoan mutants do. Number 5 on the Major Missing Mutants list is Xorn. Okay, Grant Morrison creation from the pages of New X-Men. Xorn has a very complicated history as well. Essentially, he is a mutant that the New X-Men discover in a Chinese prison in the Morrison and often with Frank Quitely run on the title, and like he is rescued by them, he becomes friendly, he teaches at school for a while, and then it turns out he's Magneto. He's evil Magneto in a big old New X-Men spoiler, but actually he's not, if you then go on to read the rest of Marvel continuity, because Marvel editors didn't really know what to do with that, and like I said, it's complicated. The important thing, though, is Hickman really digs this character. Hickman digs Xorn. He's used him in his Ultimates run. He referenced him in the pages of House of X, that you see the two of them on Krakoa. So we have seen them on Krakoa, and probably most notably, we've seen this character in Powers of 10 as one of these survivors in Moira's ninth life. Okay, we see a fair amount of him. Now, if memory serves, there was also some like Xorn poetry on a data page in the Dawn of X. I don't remember which issue exactly, but the Xorn we do see in the Moira's ninth life in Powers of 10, he's a warrior, right? He's fierce. He has a black hole for a head, a singularity for a head even, which Rasputin, the Chimera, unleashes in that issue, right? She unleashes Xorn's black hole head on, Karima, the Omega Sentinel, and they cause a distraction, trying to allow Wolverine basically to get back to Moira to end that lifeline after they get the data they need from Nimrod. But there's a lot of theories, and I've been postulating these as well, that like Rasputin and Xorn, could they have traveled through that black hole, through that ninth life, to somewhere like Amenth, which is where Ten of Swords is taking place, or somewhere else, right? Some other way we might see these characters again. Again, the general idea here being like Rasputin's way too cool to just have a Powers of 10 appearance. I think you could tie Xorn into that as well, potentially. So like what's coming for the character? I mean, I think that's the best bet, that they might have some role. Although, again, like I don't know that using Xorn's black hole head as a singularity allows him to travel through that. It kind of seems like the sort of thing where his head exploded, and maybe it would only work for Rasputin and the Omega Sentinel. But I have to admit, I don't know that much about traveling through someone's black hole head. I have not done it as regularly as I may be coming across here in this conversation. But nonetheless, like I said, like Xorn's a Hickman favorite. I would really like to see the character get established on, again, like kind of streamlined on its own terms, so we actually know what that character is all about, because again, it's had a very messy history since Grant Morrison's exit on New X-Men. Okay, so that drives to the final one I'm going to talk about today. Number 6 on the Major Missing Mutants list is the clones. Okay, now there are more that we could talk about here, but the big 3 that I'm going to talk about first, we got Strife. Okay, Strife is the evil clone of Cable. Okay, simply put, he's a Rob Liefeld creation, I imagine with co-creators who I don't know by name, and he's got amazing armor and spiky heads and little tiny feet, which are super cute. But yeah, he thinks Cable is the clone, right? That's kind of part of his hook here. Is Strife thinks that Cable is the clone and he's the real Nathan Summers. He was raised by Apocalypse after Jean and Scott had to send him into the future, and he's kind of got it out for Cable as a result of all of that, as you might expect. He's a notable villain, mutant who we have not seen as far as I'm aware. Another clone is Joseph. Now, Joseph is a clone of Magneto. Famously, in the 90s X-Men, he basically takes over the role of Magneto after the events of Fatal Attractions and kind of up on through the Onslaught era of X-Men. He is kind of a good in quotes, Magneto or a clone. He works with the X-Men to a degree, although he's never quite as powerful as the Master of Magnetism himself, even though he mirrors some of his efforts. Now, we've actually seen Joseph fairly recently here, too, which I'll talk about in the pages of the Matt Rosenberg written Uncanny X-Men. And then the third clone, probably the one that I've seen the most people reference and really be interested in seeing in the Krakoa era, is Evan Sabaner, a.k.a. Kid Apocalypse. Now, he is a clone of Apocalypse. He's cloned in the pages of Uncanny X-Force, written by Rick Remender in that very first arc of Uncanny. We see, of course, the Apocalypse solution, where Phantom X makes a decision for that team on the fate of little baby Apocalypse, and that story plays out. It's highly recommended reading, so I won't really spoil any of the details, other than say, net, there's Kid Apocalypse coming out, all that, and we have not seen that character in Krakoa as well, again, as far as I know. Now, all three clones have been seen recently in X-Men history, all in comics within the last 2 years, so we know they are generally around. Strife we saw in the Ed Brisson written run on Cable and X-Force. He shows up in his pretty standard, typical role where he's leading the Mutant Liberation Front, he's fighting against Cable, all the usual Strife business. Joseph, like I mentioned, he's in the Rosenberg Uncanny X-Men run. He kind of has a brief cameo, but nonetheless, he's around. And then Evan, we saw, was in both the Uncanny X-Men Disassembled arc relaunch of Uncanny X-Men and in the Age of X-Men event prior to the Krakoa era. He appeared to die in the Age of X-Men event. He has a role there, actually, in the Apocalypse and the Extracts mini, although I think that was a ruse, if I'm remembering correctly. I think it was kind of a fake out. But either way, we've seen all these characters, they are around. I don't even know necessarily that they would need resurrections in some cases. So what's to become of these clones? Well, in the cases where we do need resurrections or just clone permissions, based on the ruling not to resurrect Madeline Pryor in the pages of Hellions number 5, or maybe it was number 4, either way, the odds are somewhat, it was number 4, the odds are somewhat stacked against these clones, I would say. So in Hellions, after Madeline Pryor kind of battles the Hellions and their mission, and she winds up dying, Grey Crow shoots her when she's distracted talking to Havoc. The Quiet Council then has to make what they call a philosophical debate and decide, is she a clone of Jean or a mutant in her own right? And where they net out on that is to not resurrect her, or at least that's what they tell, or what Cyclops tells Havoc. Okay, could that be misdirection? Could that be a lie? It's a possibility, right? We gotta leave that out there potentially. But that's a bad sign potentially for clones being resurrected on Krakoa, I would say. Although I will toss in there that so Gabby, a.k.a. Honey Badger, she's going to be in the pages of the New Mutants, starting with issue number 14 by Vita Ayala and Rod Rice, and she's a fan favorite character. I love Gabby from the pages of All New Wolverine, written by Tom Taylor. She's an awesome character. She's 100% a clone, right? We know she's a clone. The idea that she would not be up for resurrection protocols seems kind of crummy. Seems like the kind of thing that maybe the X-Men might want to walk back. So I don't know. Is this always going to be a Quiet Council decision where they're just hey, Gabby's cool, but Strife, he sucks? I don't know. We'll see exactly how that plays out. But right now, the fact that we're not seeing them around makes me think that there are some parameters restricting clones on Krakoa. So coming next time in Missing Mutants Part 2, I've got some teases here for the mutants I will be talking about. Definitely let me know, who do you want to see? Who's missing in this era that you want to see me talk about, you want to see covered, or even characters that we've seen nothing of, maybe they're around but we haven't seen enough of them that seem pretty important. Leave the thoughts below in the comments. Any additional theories or ideas that may have come out of this as well, I would love to hear. So again, thanks everybody for checking out Krakin Krakoa. I'm Dave. You can find my stuff at comicbookherald.com. You can find me at Comic Book Herald pretty much anywhere online. And if you are interested in supporting Comic Book Herald endeavors and content like this and Krakin Krakoa videos, you can go over to patreon.com/comicbookherald for ways to support the site. And of course, all those links are included in the show notes. So thanks so much. This is Missing Mutants or Part 1 rather, and Missing Mutants Part 2 will be coming soon. So subscribe, all that fun stuff to be in the loop when that episode is released. So thanks so much everybody for listening, and as always, enjoy the comics.